I was about to turn off the light when the knock came. Sharp, urgent, the kind of knock that doesn't belong at midnight unless something is terribly wrong. My chest tightened. My first thought was maybe an accident, maybe trouble, maybe the police. But when I opened the door, it wasn't any of that. It was her, my neighbor, standing there in a thin nightgown with a sweater pulled tight around her shoulders. Eyes wide like she hadn't decided if she should really be here. And in those first 10 minutes, everything I thought I knew about my life shifted. My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 48 years old, divorced for almost a decade now, and living alone in a quiet suburb where the loudest sound most nights is the hum of the street light at the corner. I've built myself a life that looks steady on the outside. A steady job at a construction supply company. A modest house, bills paid on time, but inside it's been empty. A kind of emptiness I learned to live with but never made peace with. You get used to eating alone. You get used to silence until suddenly at midnight it's broken. She looked at me like she wasn't sure if she'd made a mistake. "I'm sorry to bother you," she whispered, her voice trembling. My power went out. I didn't know who else to ask. For a second, I just stood there barefoot, confused by how vulnerable she seemed. I'd seen her around before, passing in her yard, sometimes waving when she carried groceries. But I never knew her beyond that. A younger woman, maybe 38, who had lost her husband a few years back. That much I'd heard in whispers from neighbors. But that night, she wasn't the beautiful widow from down the street. She was someone standing in the dark asking for help. I nodded too quickly maybe and told her to come in while I grabbed a flashlight. She stepped inside, the scent of rain clinging to her hair, her eyes darting nervously around my living room like she wasn't used to being in someone else's space. I led her back outside across the lawn to her place. The night air was cool, and she pulled her sweater tighter, but said nothing. The silence felt heavy, full of things neither of us had words for. Inside her house, I checked the breaker. Simple enough, a tripped switch. Nothing serious. But she stayed close as though my presence was holding something together. When the lights flickered back on, she exhaled so softly it sounded almost like relief from something bigger than just darkness. "Thank you," she said, finally meeting my eyes. And there was something there. Not flirtation, not gratitude alone, but a weight. As if she carried more than she let anyone see. We ended up back in my kitchen because I couldn't just let her walk away into the night. After that, I made tea. She sat at the table, her hands wrapped around the cup, though it was still too hot to drink. I asked her if she was all right, if she lived alone, if she wanted me to check anything else. She smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "I've been alone a while now," she admitted. "Sometimes it just feels heavier at night." I understood that better than I wanted to admit. So I didn't push. We just sat there sipping tea, trading a few small words that somehow felt bigger than they should. And in those minutes, it wasn't about electricity or neighbors. It was about two people who had been carrying silence for too long finally breaking it. When she stood to leave, she hesitated at the door. "I don't usually bother people," she said, eyes lowered. "But tonight, I just couldn't sit there in the dark anymore." And then she was gone. I closed the door behind her and stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. I didn't know what it meant yet or what it would become. But I knew one thing. Nothing about my quiet, predictable life would ever feel the same again. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing more than a neighborly favor. A tripped breaker. A cup of tea. Polite words between two people who happened to live next door. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the image of her sitting at my table, hands wrapped around that cup like it was the only thing holding her together. Her name was Emma Carter. I learned it that morning when she stopped me by the mailbox. Sunlight in her hair, a faint tiredness still in her face. She smiled awkwardly as though unsure whether last night had been a mistake. I didn't properly introduce myself. She said, "Emma Carter." I told her my name, though she already seemed to know. That's the thing about suburbs. People always know more than they let on. Still, it felt different hearing her say my name aloud, like it belonged in her voice. We talked for a few minutes. The kind of surface conversation neighbors have, the weather, the repairs the city hadn't done on the street, how quickly the autumn nights were getting colder. but under it there was something unspoken, and I could feel it. At work later, my friend Andy noticed my distraction. He's the kind of guy who spots a crack in the wall before anyone else. "You look like somebody stole your dog," he said, leaning across the lunch table. "Or you met someone." I tried to brush it off, but he grinned. "Ah, so that's it. The widow next door. Huh? Be careful, man. Women with broken hearts can either save you or ruin you." He laughed, but there was a thread of truth in his words that stayed with me. That evening I saw her again. She was bringing in groceries, struggling with too many bags. I crossed over without thinking and took half from her hands. She didn't resist. Instead, she sighed in that quiet way people do when they're used to doing everything alone. Inside her kitchen, I set the bags down and noticed how bare the space felt. A home but not lived in fully. No photos on the fridge, no clutter, just silence wrapped around walls. She caught me looking and gave a half smile. "It's been hard to put things back the way they used to be," she admitted. "Sometimes it's easier to keep it all unfinished." I didn't know what to say, so I didn't feel the silence. She seemed to appreciate that. That's when the first shadow appeared, her brother Luke Morgan. He showed up unannounced, walking into the kitchen with the air of someone who believed he had the right to check on her. His eyes fell on me immediately, narrowing. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone sharp. Emma Carter's face tensed. "This is Nathan Brooks. He's been helping out." Luke Morgan looked at me like I was a trespasser. "Helping out," he repeated, but the words dripped with suspicion. "You don't need help, Emma Carter, especially not from strangers." I wanted to defend myself, but I held my tongue. This wasn't the place. Emma Carter's cheeks flushed, caught between us. She quickly thanked me for carrying the bags and gave me a look that clearly meant, "Please go." I left, but the unease followed me home. I sat in my living room, the television flickering in the background, thinking about her brother's stare, protective maybe, or something harsher. Later that night, I heard footsteps on my porch. When I opened the door, Emma Carter stood there again, not trembling like before, but quieter, her shoulders heavy. "I'm sorry about Luke Morgan," she whispered. "He thinks he's protecting me. He doesn't understand that sometimes I just need someone to sit with." I let her in. We didn't say much. She sat on the couch, I in the chair across from her. The silence between us wasn't heavy this time. It was fragile, careful, but almost comforting. At one point, her hand brushed the armrest close enough to mine that it felt like an invisible line had been crossed. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. It was nothing really, just stillness. Two people breathing in the same space. But it felt like more than any words could have said. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated again at the door. "I don't know what this is," she admitted, her eyes soft and unsure. "But thank you." After she walked back into the night, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about helping a neighbor anymore. Something deeper was beginning, and I knew it wouldn't come without complications. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice. That's the thing about small suburban streets. Nothing stays quiet for long. One evening, I was raking leaves when old Margaret Evans stopped by the fence. She leaned on it like a queen inspecting her land, her sharp eyes fixed on me. "I've seen Emma Carter leaving your place late at night," she said. "People will start talking Nathan Brooks." I forced a polite smile, but inside I felt my chest tighten. Talking, that's exactly what she wanted to do. And by morning, half the street would have their own version of the story. Emma Carter came over the next night, a thin scarf wrapped around her neck. I could tell by her eyes she'd already heard. She sat at my table, twisting the scarf in her hands, frustration pulling at her features. "They think I'm reckless," she said quietly, "like I'm looking for trouble." I wanted to tell her none of it mattered, but I knew better. For someone like her, a widow younger with a family that watched her every move, it mattered a great deal. The gossip wasn't just idle talk. It was judgment. "I don't care what they say," I told her. "I know who you are." She gave me a small, tired smile, but I could see the doubt in her. "That's the problem. I don't even know who I am anymore, and now I've dragged you into it." The words stung, not because she meant them harshly, but because I realized how much fear ruled her life. The days that followed were tense. Luke Morgan confronted me again, this time in front of the hardware store. "Stay away from her," he said, grabbing my arm. His voice was low, dangerous. "She doesn't need a middle-aged man complicating her life." I shook him off, anger rising. "She's not a child. She can make her own choices." His eyes burned into mine, but he didn't answer. He just turned and walked away, leaving me with the echo of his threat. That night, Emma Carter didn't come by. The silence in my house was unbearable. I kept replaying her words, her brother's warning. The way Margaret Evans had smirked like she already knew the ending. For the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting for something, and I didn't know if I had the right to. 2 nights later, just past midnight, I heard it again. The knock softer this time, hesitant. When I opened the door, Emma Carter stood there, her face pale, eyes glistening with tears. She was holding back. "I can't do this alone anymore," she whispered. I stepped aside and she walked in. She didn't sit on the couch like before. She just stood in the middle of my living room, her hands trembling slightly. Every time I think I can move forward, someone reminds me I should stay frozen. Like if I love again, I'll be betraying the past. Her words cut deep because I understood them. I'd lived frozen, too, in my own way. I didn't rush to close the space between us. I just stood near enough that she could feel I wasn't leaving. She finally looked up, her eyes locking on mine with a rawness I hadn't seen before. "I don't know what people expect of me," she said, "but I do know what I feel when I'm here, and it terrifies me." Her hand brushed against mine, almost by accident, but neither of us moved away. That fragile contact carried more weight than any embrace. It was a confession, silent, but undeniable. We stayed like that in the quiet glow of the lamp, until the storm inside her seemed to ease just a little. She left before dawn, as the first gray light crept into the sky, but the memory of her hand against mine lingered, as real as any promise spoken aloud, and I realized something. This wasn't just a story about neighbors anymore. This was about a woman trying to fight her way out of grief. A man trying to find meaning again, and a world that wouldn't stop whispering against them. I should have expected it, but it still caught me off guard. Luke Morgan showed up at my doorstep on a Saturday afternoon. His face hard as stone, his stance wide like he was ready for a fight. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't invite him in. He didn't wait for an invitation either. He stepped across the threshold like he owned the place. "I told you before," he started. "Stay away from Emma Carter." Something inside me snapped. Weeks of whispers, stares, the weight of his judgment. "You don't get to decide that," I answered, my voice sharper than I intended. "She's vulnerable," he shot back. "And you're what? Some lonely middle-aged man who thinks he can fill the gap. You'll ruin her." The words hit me, but I stood my ground. I've never tried to replace anyone. I just care about her. Can you say the same? Or are you too busy protecting her from shadows? For a moment, I thought he might swing at me. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. But then he shook his head, muttering, "This isn't over." He left, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. When the silence settled, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from the adrenaline of finally standing up to him. That evening, Emma Carter came by. She looked nervous, like she already knew what had happened. She sat in the armchair across from me, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. "Luke Morgan came here, didn't he?" she asked. I nodded. "He doesn't think you should see me." She gave a bitter laugh. "Luke Morgan doesn't think I should see anyone. To him, I'll always be the widow who needs guarding. Like I'm too fragile to make my own choices." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw not just her strength, but the exhaustion beneath it. "Do you know what it's like?" she whispered. "To feel like every step forward is a betrayal. To wake up and wonder if smiling means you've forgotten the person you lost." I didn't have answers, only truth. "I know what it's like to live years in silence. To stop believing you deserve more. But you do, Emma Carter. You deserve to breathe again." She looked at me, then really looked, and something shifted in the air between us. She stood restless, crossing the room. I followed with my eyes as she stopped by the window, her hands gripping the sill. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her back still to me. I rose and walked closer, but not too close. "So am I?" She turned and our eyes locked. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out and took her hand. It was warm, trembling, alive. She didn't pull away. We stood there, the world narrowing to the quiet rhythm of our breathing, the lamp casting a soft glow around us. My thumb brushed her knuckles, a simple gesture, but it felt like stepping across a line I'd been afraid of all my life. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she squeezed my hand. Just once, just enough to say what she couldn't. Then, just as suddenly, she let go. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't. Not yet." The space between us filled again with silence, heavier than before. But it wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of something unfinished, something waiting. When she left that night, she paused at the door. "You scare me," she said softly, "because with you, I can finally imagine feeling alive again." The door closed behind her, but her words stayed, echoing through the walls of my house long into the night. And I knew, no matter what her brother thought, no matter what the neighbors whispered, we were already past the point of pretending this was nothing. The night it finally happened. There was no storm, no broken lights, no excuse, just another ordinary midnight. When I heard the knock again, I opened the door and Emma Carter stood there, not trembling this time, not making excuses. She wore a simple coat over her nightclothes, her hair slightly tousled, her eyes steady on mine. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her hands were clenched at her sides. I stepped back and she walked past me, stopping in the center of my living room as though she needed the space to hold everything she was about to say. "I'm tired of being told who I am," she began. "By Luke Morgan, by the neighbors, even by the memory of a man I loved and lost. I can't keep living in that cage." I stayed quiet, letting her words pour out, afraid that if I spoke too soon, I might break her courage. She looked at me then, eyes burning with something fragile and fierce all at once. "The truth is, Nathan Brooks, I'm scared. Scared of what people will think. Scared of what it means if I let myself feel this. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life alone, pretending I don't want more." The silence between us stretched, and I felt my heart pound with every second. She took a step closer, then another. "When I come here," she whispered, "I don't feel like a widow. I just feel like a woman. And you? You make me believe I could start again." I swallowed hard, every wall I had built over the years crumbling in that moment. "You don't have to start alone," I said quietly. Her eyes filled, and before I could think, she reached for my hand. Our fingers interlaced naturally like it had always been waiting to happen. Her grip was firm, desperate, alive. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. That touch, that simple joining of hands carried everything. The grief, the fear, the fragile hope that we could build something beyond the whispers and shadows. We stood there for a long time, holding on like the world outside didn't exist. And maybe for once it didn't. When she finally pulled back, her voice was steadier. "I don't know where this goes. I just know I don't want to run from it anymore." I nodded because I didn't know either, but I knew it mattered. I knew she mattered. The next morning, the street was buzzing as usual. Margaret Evans peering through her curtains. Luke Morgan's truck parked in her driveway like a warning, but none of it touched me the way it used to. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't living by their rules. Later that day, Emma Carter walked over openly in broad daylight, a small smile tugging at her lips. She didn't care who saw. Neither did I. We sat on my porch, sipping coffee, the autumn air crisp around us. She laughed at something I said, a soft, unguarded laugh that filled the quiet with warmth. And I realized I hadn't heard that sound in years. Not from her, not from myself. Maybe the world would keep whispering. Maybe her brother would keep frowning. Maybe we'd stumble through awkward days and nights of doubt. But none of that mattered as much as the fact that we were here together, choosing not to hide anymore. When she rose to leave, she touched my shoulder gently. "I'll see you tonight," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet certainty. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the promise of something real. Not perfect, not easy, but real. That night when I closed my eyes, I didn't hear silence pressing in on me anymore. I heard her voice steady and clear. "You make me believe I could start again." And I knew whatever came next, my life had already changed forever.